Today, I'm going to make a video showing you guys my Pokemon cube. Now, I know most of the people that watch my videos probably only play Magic, but maybe they play a little bit of Pokemon or they know how to play. But I'm going to plug this video in some other places, and hopefully the Pokemon heads will get to see it. So cubing in Pokemon is probably the best way to play because constructed Pokemon leaves a little bit to be desired, to put it mildly. And then anyone who's played older Pokemon, or especially like base fossil era, the rule box era of Pokemon is just kind of a different game. But I do think there's some things about the new era of Pokemon that are a lot better than the base fossil era. And most people, when they build a Pokemon cube, because Pokemon works off of evolution lines, so for example, it's a lot harder to do a singleton. You theoretically could, but you have all these evolution lines to put together while you're drafting. And some people choose to do the mutant strategy, which I think loses all the flavor and defeats the purpose. So I retain my evolution lines, and I do my evolution lines as 4, 3, and 4, 3, and 3. The fourth one of this is somewhere else. I'll explain that a little bit later. And then that gets you the consistency that you're going for. And then once people pick which lines they're going to play, there then becomes another challenge of there's so many Pokemon to choose from, but at a draft table, everyone's only going to get 40 or 60 cards, depending on if you want to play 40 card deck or 60 card deck with 4 prizes or 6 prizes respectively. I feel like the game is played better at 6 prizes. I think when you play 6 prize games, you're also kind of boxed into playing best of 1. So just for time reasons. So I could see the argument either way there. But then you have all those different evolution lines take up space, and you're not going to draft. So most people, they have a cube and it's like there's 360 cards and you just shuffle it up and you go. But then if only 4 people show up to draft, those 4 people have to draft 90 cards because you don't want this awkward, oh, I saw a Charmander, a Charizard's in here, and if you only draft half the pile and then half the line's in there and half the line isn't, leads to feels bad. So you pretty much always have to draft your whole cube every time. Well, I came up with a different system that works a lot better than that can scale any player count. And not only can I scale any player count, I can go from anywhere from 2 players all the way to 16 players. And not only did I do that, but then when it came to choosing which Pokemon I want to run, I just decided I want to do all of them. So I did all the Pokemon in Gen 1, and that was such a success. I was like, I could do more. And so I built my Pokemon cube, and excluding the baby Pokemon, I have every Pokemon between Gen 1 through Gen 6 in this cube, which means this cube's like 3,000 cards big, but you don't have to draft all of it at one time. So what I devised was a key system. So for every player, I have a key of stage 2 Pokemon, and then for every player, I use one stage 2, or one Pokemon that has a stage 2, and then I use 3 Pokemon that have a stage 1, and then a couple of basics. The math on the basics is just slightly different. I'll get into that later. And then I go through my boxes, and I can have all these lines grabbed and shuffled up and ready to go for each person. And then depending on how many players I get to show up, then each player who has their pile put together, they start shuffling passing half their stuff to the right, and then they shuffle, they pass half their stuff to the right. And once, for example, if there's 7 people, you just have to do 6 shuffle and passes, and then you can shuffle that pile and start making packs to draft right from there. So I've able to make a cube that plays any player, and if I upped my items and trainers that I just had that were built for this, if I just took the numbers and doubled them, and then even doubled them again, my cube could actually hold a 64-person tournament, which maybe I'll get to that point someday. But if I do, I kind of want to contact the people that put on regionals and turn it into like an actual sanctioned event that people can participate in, because it's a lot of fun. Now we've got the key system. Like I said, when I do like 8 people's worth, I try not to have no more than 2 of a single type in a stage 2 line, and then I try not to have more than 4 of any type overall. And that kind of gives me a balance. Pokemon never has a pure symmetry, but that seems to work pretty well. And then if I only have like 4 people, I try not to have more than 2 of one type and 1 of each type. Once I've hit 1 of each type, then I can kind of randomize it from there. There's no rule box, and everything in here is roughly Sun and Moon era to Scarlet Violet era. Partly, all those cards are really cheap, which means anyone can do this. And they can do this just kind of picking and choosing their favorites, as obviously Gardevoir is like a big favorite for a lot of people. But you can pick and choose your favorites kind of each type without having to collect as many Pokemon. But there's something nice to be said about how many different things you can get. I can shuffle up and play this cube, and it'll feel similar because the items and trainers have a level of redundancy to them. But I can play this cube 100 times and never get tired of it, because I'm always going to see there's lines that are in here that I haven't actually even gotten a chance to see people play yet, let alone play for myself. But now I want to go over mostly what I want to go over is you can do that per player. Let's say you wanted to play with 40 card piles. Then instead of doing 4-3-3 lines and 4-3 for the stage 1 lines, you go 3-2-2, and then you go 3-2 for these lines. And then you cut your item supporters back from 24 to 16. And then you've already done all the sorting you need to do 40 card draft piles. It works exactly the same, and have your 4 prize games. So when you have 1 of these and 3 of these, you have 4, 3, and 3 is 10. 4 and 3 is 7. So now you're at 31. And then you add 5 more basics. And how I come up with 5 is regular ones are, I put 3 of them in. And then something like a legendary Pokemon or a mythical Pokemon, I put 1 of. Usually they're stronger basics anyway. And then just from like a flavor perspective, it's like, oh, you got the legendary bird or whatever. This gets you to 36. Then I have a mix of 12 items per player from the shuffle pile and 12 supporters per player. And then if I was to do this, which gives you exactly 60. So you can do 4 packs of 15 on 7 or more people, up to like a table of 10. After 10, I would start splitting it into 2 tables. And then I would do 6 packs of 10 on tables that are less than 7, because you still get that go-around factor. And then I actually, if you randomly have a 10-card pack, this is almost 10 cards. Let's just put one more thing in here. when you're doing a draft, in Magic, you draft one card, it goes around, whatever. In Pokemon, it's a lot easier to get analysis paralysis. And so, let's say you had, an even better example. Let's say you had these two cards in the same pack. Now you're stuck with a really difficult decision of, oh, I want to kind of pick this Torterra, but then I don't know if this Turtwig's going to come around. And so I'm just going to ignore that whole thing, and I'm going to pick this Boss's Orders, like solid value card or whatever. Well, I actually recommend drafting Pokemon picking 2 cards at a time, because you'll just run into situations where instead of thinking about the wheel, you're only going to see the pack once, but you do get 2 things out of it. And so it's similar to getting the feels good of like, ooh, I picked this and then this wheeled or whatever. And I've done it both ways. The decks come out more or less about the same either way you do it. You could do it whichever way you want. I'm just telling you that if you pick 2 cards at a time and you're drafting 60 card piles, you're going to finish picking 2 cards at a time in 25 minutes maybe. You're going to finish picking 1 card at a time in like 50 minutes. And your decks are going to come out. You could have one table, like 6 people drafting it the one way, 6 people drafting decks around the other way. The strength value is going to be near identical. There's not a lot of reason not to pick 2 cards at a time, other than like people don't do that when they play Magic. And for Magic, for various reasons, it makes sense to pick 1 card at a time. But no, picking 2 cards at a time, I recommend. Even in the 40 card smaller draft pile pool, I still think, why spend twice as much time drafting and less time playing the game? So I recommend just doing that way. Get some things sorted back in here. Now, it's pretty obvious. So, and then in my lines, and I'll pull a different one out this time. In my lines, while some people choose to go singleton, and so if they had this Fennekin, and usually the basics in an evolution line are boring either way, they'd pick a bunch of different ones. Having the same art and just the literal same card is going to speed up and make your drafting process easier for someone who's just jumping in. Not that any of these Pokemon are going to be highly recognizable for their playability anyway, because competitive Pokemon is almost exclusively rule box, with the exception of a handful of supports. But even though there's probably 3 interesting different Delphoxes I could use, you see one, and if it has a build around idea, like this one works off of kind of burning being a mechanic, you can lean into that more, knowing that the other Delphoxes you pick are going to have that same ability. And so that's another reason that I recommend just one of a type at a time. It seems to work better that way. It just makes the process easier for people to get into, which should be part of the goal. Because once people play a cube draft, it's going to feel silly wanting to try and play something else. This is just like the best thing to do when you actually get the numbers together and people want to just hang out and have a good time. Now, you might think if you had an 8-person table, that means you got 8 stage 2s running around and 24 different stage 1s running around. That's a lot of different stuff to put together. But believe me, it's also 8 different people drafting, and those evolution lines self-sort, and they don't all have to see play. Pretty easy for a deck to have like 1 stage 2 and only 1 or 2 of the 3. So yeah, not every evolution line comes together, or some come together only partly, but you don't need all of them. That extra amount helps in itself. it's pretty easy when you're, and so because I was trying to do everything, I had to stretch slightly into different eras. But it's pretty easy if you're really fond of XY era. Just look for the evolution lines that are printed in the XY era and pick those up. And your power level balance is going to be pretty good if you just stick inside the same era the whole time. I tried to keep everything in Sword and Shield era, but like Alakazam didn't get a non-rule box printing until last year. And then some cards like Greninja, they almost always print at rule box variants and not a normal variant. So the last playable Greninjas from Sun and Moon era. So I just did what I could, while being as complete as I could. And just recently, they printed in Prismatic Evolutions Aromatisse and Spritzy as Psychic type instead of Fairy type, which is what the earlier ones were. So I didn't even have the full 6 gens complete until really recently, but now it's complete. It feels pretty awesome. I've got like a bow on it. I don't really need to change it around anymore, and that's cool. And if they continue to print more baby Pokemon, I'll pick those up. And then I play them kind of like the legendaries in here, but there's certainly, they feel really optional. Now I want to go over, so I've got my 36 cards there. And then I've got my items and supporters. So you have my 36 drafted Pokemon per player, and then I'll do 12 supporters and then 12 non-supporters in that item slot shuffled into there. And now I want to go over my supporters, which I've got sorted here. For the most part, it's singleton, but there are a couple things that it didn't feel like you could singleton. Now, keep in mind my supporter count. I've got 192 of them because this can scale up to 16 people at the same tutor. One of the main effects you want redundancy for is boss's orders. If you're a smaller cube, you could get away with just playing the 4 different bosses and like a Lysander, and maybe you grab a Gust of Wind from like base set. And that would be about the round of redundancy between that, and you could put like a Prime Catcher and a Guzma or whatever. But this is a really valuable effect in the game, and you want to have it. So at 16 player capacity, I've got 16 copies of Boss's Orders rolling around. That to me feels like a good number. Now, the other card that I wanted that level of redundancy with is Professor's Research. And now we got 8 different ones. For a while, I had 4 of 4 different artworks, and then it turned into like a smattering of other stuff. But now we've got 8 different professors. I didn't plan this out that well. So I've got 16 Professor's Research for 16 players worth. So if you're an 8-player cube, you pick up 1 at each of the different professors. Have it done that way. Those are the 2 main effects that you need a lot of. Well, there's 2 other main effects. So you want some level of hand disruption. The one that's really generic and makes sense to have more than singleton is Judge. But if you want to just be redundant and play a bunch of Ns or Ionos, the main thing is you want things to mess with their hand. So, if they have a Pokemon that's attack is like search their deck for 2 cards and put it in their hand, something like a Judge is really cool to have that disruption. Or, they just did something that drew them a whole bunch of cards. You can kind of reset that. While also, and if you're ahead and your hand's really good and their hand's poor and you have a Judge in your hand, you don't play it. So it's a nice skill testing card. And it's a decent effect. So those are the 3 things: big hand fills, disruption where you put their creature up to the front, and hand disruption like that are the 3 things I think you need to make sure you have in your cube. Then obviously you're going to have access to a whole bunch of different cards that say draw 3. The draw 3s, while not great in competitive play, are pretty valuable in this kind of play. I have 8 of these, just boring draw 3 cards. It's obviously not as important as the other one. And then I got a couple others that I have multiples of, mostly because we got different artworks for them. So I got 2 Pokemon Fan Club. It's nice to hunt up basics. I got 2 copies of Lady. It's nice to fix energy in a multicolor deck. It's also a just pretty good draw value. And then I've got 2 Pokemon Center Lady. Now I know this card looks really terrible, but when you're outside of a rule box game, the healing and the status removal, like both halves of this card are way more relevant than they are in a constructed event. And 60 damage is like a whole medium range attack, so it's like actually a pretty decent tempo play. And we're gonna go over our other supporters. Supporters that grab basics. I mean, this one grabs a basic and it's a switch. This one grabs 3 basic, 120 HP or less. This one's 3 basic, but of different types. This one's 2 basic or 2 energy. This one's 3 basic, excluding rule box, basically. And this one's 3 basic, excluding rule box. These are great setup cards. This is like the equivalent of like a Buddy Buddy Poffin. These are nice supporters to have. Next, we got a couple Wally effects. These are really cool and explosive. This one can't grab ones with abilities. This one can. Excluding Pokemon EX. And there's no rule box in here, so they're functionally almost exactly the same. Getting your evolution lines to gel, these cards are good. Cards that look for evolutions are good. This can grab any Pokemon, so it's good. This can evolve up to 2 different Pokemon, applying to ones that can evolve during that turn naturally anyway. That's good value putting your lines together. Here's basically the same thing. Search for 2 evolution. This one, search for 3 evolution, not including rule box. Next, we got some recovery style cards. This one's a draw 2, and it returns an energy. Then we've got returning 4 energy. I could have put multiples of this, but I figured this effect isn't actually that desirable. Can return 2 supporters or stadiums. Getting other supporters back can be really nice. Put 3 any combination of rule box basic energy. This one's really nice. This one's return either 2 Pokemon or 2 energy. Also pretty nice. This one takes some coin flips, but it's returning literally any card to the top of your deck. Unique effect, and so it's in here. They're almost each style of card is in batches of 6, which is pretty randomized when you're only drafting, like a quarter of it because there's 4 of you and it goes 16 people deep, or 24 people. 24 people can draft this cube as is with 40 card piles because the items and supporters stretch further. Here's my healing cards. This one's basically a Pokemon Center. Heal all the evolution Pokemon, but discard the energy from them. So basically a max potion. Shuffle a Pokemon and all of its cards back into your deck. And put a Pokemon into your hand. Discard all the attached cards. Basic scoop up. Put a Pokemon and all the cards attached to your hand, but it has to have damage counters on it. Here's basically redundancy on the AZ effect. And then here's a scoop up, but it only hits basics. But that's still pretty good, getting all the cards attached back too. Then we got the cards that let us look for anything. Cassiopeia has to be the last card in your hand. But then you get to grab any 2 cards. This is computer search in supporter form. Discard 2 cards, search your deck for anything, put it in your hand. We got some redundancy on this one. Grab any 2 cards, put them on top. Nice if you have Pokemon with abilities that draw cards. This one's flip 2 coins and then tutor per heads. So it's usually tutor for 1 card on average. So that's pretty powerful. And then we've got search for 3 cards, put them in your hand, end your turn, which is something that can get brutally punished by like a judge or an Iono. Next, we have some draw 3 cards that do other things. So we've got a rhyme. Your opponent has to switch their basic out. You draw 3 cards. Draw 3 cards. Your opponent discards their bench down to just 3 Pokemon. Each player reveals their hand. Draw 3. Shuffle up to 5 Pokemon in your discard back into your deck. Which these ones that put cards back into the deck, sometimes if your draft didn't go well, it's a lot more common to have a line that's only like 2 and 2 or whatever. And then being able to return things that you might discard to a research or something are just as valuable here as they are in constructed play. This one's a switch and a draw 3. And then we have draw 3 and discard a stadium. Sometimes there's some stadiums that do a lot of work, so good to have some answers for those other than just bumping them with your own stadiums. And then we've got some hand fillers. This one's a switch, and then you also draw up to 5. It's kind of nice. This one's a draw up to 6. Bianca's the same thing, draw up to 6. We have a draw up to 5, but if you took a knockout on the last turn, you draw up to 8. And then we have draw up to 6, or if it's your first turn, draw up to 8. And then we have at the end of your turn, you draw up to 8. Which is kind of neat, a little different. Next, we have 4 different shuffle and draws. This one is either a switch or shuffle your hand and draw 5. Then we have the best shuffle and draw. Shuffle your hand, draw 6. Then we've got the 2 other shuffle your hand and draw 5. Pretty easy to turbo your hand out and get a lot of value out of those. Then we have some kind of glimpse draw effects. So look at the top 8, put all the Pokemon you see there that you want to put into your hand. Look at the top 7, grab 2 supporters or 2 trainers. Look at the top 7, grab a Pokemon and a trainer. And discard a card, and then look at the top 8, put one of those into your hand. Anything you want there. It's pretty cool. And we've got some other kind of miscellaneous search effects. If you have no Pokemon with abilities, you can just tutor up 2 trainers. It's pretty cool. Then we've got search for 3 supporters. So kind of it's slower if you know you can play the long game. Grab a lot of value on that card. Grab a supporter and a basic energy. It's kind of a nice 2 things. And like burning your whole supporter turn to grab another supporter is like, that doesn't seem that great. But the range of different supporters you can put in your deck where it's like, I want disruption right now. I want card draw right now. I want recovery. Like you can get a lot of versatility off of these cards that do stuff like this. This one, grab a stadium and an energy, most notably not a basic energy. So that's pretty cool. We've got some energy disruption. So discard an energy to the active. Then we've got put an energy attached to your opponent's active on top of their deck. And then we've got your opponent reveals their hand, discard 2 energy. Put an energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon into their hand. So obviously doesn't seem as strong as to the top of the deck or discarding it, but this one can target guys they're building up on their bench. So those are interesting. And then we've got some only if you were knocked out last turn. This one's grab 3 out of the top 8 cards. It's pretty cool. This one is grab any card and then also accelerate an energy from your discard to one of your Pokemon. So that's really powerful. Then Rosa lets you search for a trainer, an energy, and a Pokemon. So 3 different tutors after suffering a knockout. And this one just lets you search for any 2 cards you want after a knockout. Pretty much all my supporters and items are within XY, black and white, forward. Before XY, rules on things are like tools work different. There's a certain level of older era where the supporters are supporters, but they aren't trainers. And same with like items and really older sets, like stuff like that gets muddy. So I just don't mess with that. And then we've got a whole bunch, and I've got about 24. I think I have exactly 24 supporters that are energy type specific. It's not totally balanced. It'd be cool if it was, but they just don't print fully balanced. So we got some grass ones there. We got some fire ones here. We got some water ones. Couple lightning ones. Yeah. Some fighting ones. And then if you want, just for consistency, you could pick the best one out of these, which like would be Corina here, or, whichever one you're feeling, and just do redundancy on that. But if you're an 8-person cube and you're going to draft all 8 all the time, you probably want at least one of each typing. There's a couple psychic ones. Then we got a couple dark, a couple steel, a couple normal. People forget that's a type. And a couple dragon ones as well. So we're getting through it. We're almost the end of the supporters. Then we've got some acceleration. This one just lets you make another attach from your hand. This one returns from their active and lets you attach to your active, so it's kind of both. This one accelerates 2 energy to a Pokemon. Can't attack this turn. The fact that it doesn't end your turn is kind of nice. You can utilize it to maybe get a retreat or do some other kind of oddball things. And we've got Cafe Master, 3 different types. Attach them to 3 different Pokemon on your bench. This one's a little bit more work and setup. And then it ends your turn. Acceleration is really powerful. This one's the strongest acceleration. And if you just really like having acceleration, you just grab 4 of these or a mixture of this and the Gita. And then the next one I'm going to show you guys. Just play the better ones if you want. This one's really good. You just grab 2 of different types. One accelerates, one goes into your hand. Then we've got a Marnie's Pride from your discard onto one of your benched. It's a little bit better than from your hand, but sometimes really early game you don't have one in your discard yet. So those are all the acceleration cards I got. And then we've got some discard effects. This one's a draw 2, but then they discard 1 at random. This one, each player discards 2. And then we've got your opponent reveals their hand. Discard up to 2 items you find there. Your opponent discards until they go down to 3 cards in hand. Flip a coin. This is a fixed Team Rocket's trap. Of heads, they lose 3 random cards from their hand back into their deck. And then discard a stadium, and then they discard 3 cards from their hand. Anytime you can get in a situation where you can get them to discard down to 0 cards, and they're working solely off the top of the deck is really powerful. So it's nice to have a handful of discard effects. If you're playing with less supporters, I think I would definitely have at least Jesse James and the Delinquent, just as that value of getting someone empty-handed. So powerful. Those are the ones I would deem important out of this. Here we've got some kind of oddball searches. This one grabs 3 Pokemon with Retreat Cross 4. So it's narrow, but in that sense, it's also something that isn't necessarily a high pick. So the person who wants it gets it, and that's kind of cool. We've got, you discard your hand, you search for a Pokemon, a supporter, and an energy. So it's a nice kind of setup into the next turn. Obviously, if you don't have much of a hand, pretty good card. Discard your hand, search for 2 trainers. Same kind of thing, just kind of setting up for a later turn. Search for a trainer, a lot of versatility there. We got some healing cards. Heal a Pokemon that's down to 30 HP or more remaining. The healing cards aren't very good in constructed play, but constructed play focuses a lot more on like just getting an attacker that can just one-hit kill. And so there's not a lot of room for a card like this to give the value that it does. But in a cube play, the healing cards are actually pretty good. This one's a switch card, but for anything, yeah, it's a switch effect, and then you heal 30 damage from the Pokemon you put on your bench. We've got like an energy switch, move 2 energy from one Pokemon to another, so it's a double energy switch. It's kind of cool. This one is a coin flip of either a switch or a boss. Either way, if you have a really bad matchup in the active spot, it either kicks their thing out or kicks your thing out. So, while wacky, inconsistent, it's also at a certain level, it is kind of always doing what you want it to do. And then here is a boss, but only on a basic, and then it makes it confused too. But boss gust effects, they're always good. And then here's Prime Catcher, supporter form. Switch your bench to the active, switch your active to the bench, and then discard 2 cards from your hand, discard an energy from an opponent's Pokemon. Pretty good disruption. Got Ninja Boy. More people are familiar with Thornton these days. This is a really powerful effect, and because cube drafts are a lot more kind of random, whatever evolution you have in your hand, the fact that your basic can turn into the thing that you're going to evolve up, is pretty cool. This is just a pretty good draw card. You have to have 4 or fewer cards in hand, but you draw a card for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play. And then here's another kind of random one. It's a Hex Maniac. Turns all of your Pokemon's abilities off all the way until your next turn. Pretty narrow as far as being useful. If your cube is smaller, it's debatable if you even want to have an effect like this. Obviously, if your cube's smaller and you only pick Pokemon where there are some really big, relevant abilities, like go ahead and play it, I guess. Usually it doesn't make it into people's decks. They're just like, I don't know if that's going to do something. But there's definitely the potential for it to be pretty relevant. And this one, if your opponent is up on prize cards, you play this one, and then you can play 2 other supporters in the same turn. Just kind of cool. And there are some supporter heavy decks every once in a while, and they play this, and it's hard to say if it's good. And we have a Gladion. Lets you trade this card with one of your prizes. In Cube, being able to trade a card with the prize card is pretty vital sometimes, just because your evolution lines might be thinner if your draft didn't quite go according to plan. Here's a draw 2, and you can look at your prize cards. It's just kind of nice if something gets trapped in there, and it's like, I know what to grab on my first knockout. This one, you put up to 3 prize cards in your hand. Then for each prize you put in your hand this way, you put a card from your hand back down as a prize. What's cool about this is you get to put 3 cards you might not want, and then you also, you know what they are, so you can draw your other prizes first or draw one of those if that's actually what you need. If your opponent is up on prizes, it's kind of like a judge effect, except you draw 6 cards and they draw 2. And you don't even have to actually be down on prizes. Your opponent just has to have 3 or fewer. So late game, put them low on cards in hand. Pretty cool effect. Here's basically a judge, but it goes to the bottom of the deck. And on this one, you get 5 and they only get 4. So slightly better than a judge. And then the cards going exactly to the bottom. If you don't play a bunch of shuffle effects, you can, mentally keep track of that. Use it to your advantage. Then we've got this one, your opponent just has to have more prizes. So if they just nab the first knockout real quick, each player shuffles their hand in. You get 6, they get 3. That's pretty cool. And we've got Iono here. It's like the modern staple. Each player shuffles their hand, puts it on the bottom, draws a card for each of their remaining prizes. So nice balancing effect. Good card draw early, but then also a good way to get their hand empty if you're trading prizes and getting towards the end. And then N is the older version of that, where it shuffles instead of putting it on the bottom. It's just the cards are in the deck. N has like 4 different artworks. So if you're committed to kind of being singleton and at a smaller cube, you could just put like 4 different N's in there. Hit that same kind of flavor without doing like as many judges or whatever. And we got some kind of extra attack supporters. There's Leon doing extra 30 damage. Then we've got Agatha moving 3 damage from your active to their active, which can be pretty game swinging. We've got Professor Kukui. It's 20 extra damage, but you also get to draw 2 cards. That's pretty cool. Then we've got a Grimsley. You move 3 damage from one of their Pokemon to another of their Pokemon. These damage spread cards can lead to 2 prize turns in a format that doesn't have 2 prize Pokemon. So they're probably better than they usually are. And then I kind of consider this an attack card just because it guarantees your flip. And there's some Pokemon that are like, if heads, do a ton. If tails, do nothing. And so this can be a pretty good attack card. It also affects the effect of a trainer card. So it can turn a Crushing Hammer into just energy removal. Most of the coin flip type things like that are more attack based. Then we've got a Koga's Trap. You make your opponent's active both confused and poisoned. So just a nice little bit of disruption. And this one's either 20 damage or draw your hand up to 5. Both kind of good effects. So then we got a little bit more kind of card draw fillers here. Small ball stuff. Put a card in your hand on the bottom, draw up to 5. Choose a card in your hand, discard the rest, then draw 4, basically drawing up to 5. Discard any number of cards in your hand, then draw up to 5. And we got 3 cards here that return other cards. This one puts 3 combination of Pokemon or supporter, except for Team Yell's Chair, from your discard pile into your deck. Here's the broken version of it. Each player shuffles all their cards in their discard piles back into their deck. Debatable. Some people would be like, this card's really busted and it just shouldn't be in the cube. I haven't had a problem with it, but people do play it and it is good. And then shuffle up to 6 Pokemon and energy from your discard back into your deck. So double Super Rod. It's a good effect. That is all of the supporters. Kind of a lot more randomized. The items, supporters from a lore kind of standpoint, makes sense for them to only be one of each. The items have redundancy because it would make sense that everyone could have items. Now, I've thought about having 16 rare candy, but not every deck's a rare candy deck. But rare candy is a really unique effect, and I do recommend that you play multiple. If you're an 8-person cube, you could probably get away with just 4. I don't know. I play 12. This feels like a good number for 16 people. And the card gets played and used. I prefer just specifically the newer wording. The older wording of rare candy is like kind of busted. Then we got a bunch of items that we got 4 of. 4 Poke Gear, dig for specific supporters. 4 Evolution Incense, just nice bread and butter card. 4 Escape Rope, both a switch and kind of a gust effect. It's pretty good. 4 actual switch. Switch cards are pretty nice to have. 4 Pokemon Communication. It's another nice kind of evolution incense type card. Just kind of lining up your evolutions in your draft deck. This is a good effect to have. 4 Professor's Letter. This is like an energy search, but then it's also just really good. It's a draw too. And if you didn't feel like playing this one for power-based reasons, you could just do energy search. But it's nice to have cards kind of like this for the decks that are trying to play 2 or 3 different types. Got energy retrieval. Just nice kind of bread and butter card. We got our bread and butter basic searchers, 4 Nest Ball, 4 Quick Ball. We got our good for basics and for mid levels on stage 2s, the level ball, 90 HP or less. We've got 4 Great Ball, just more items, kind of piecing your lines together. And then we got 4 Ultra Ball, because they're all really good. Obviously, if you wanted your decks to be stronger, you just do just Nest Balls and Ultra Balls or whatever. But I like playing a bit of each. I thought about having 4 of this card instead of Pokegear 3.0, but right now here's a handful of things that are less popular for every deck to have, so I'm just having 2 copies instead of 4. We got some Energy Switch. We got some Acrobike, which is like a slightly different, sometimes better, sometimes worse, trekking shoes. Got some trekking shoes. We've got Last Chance Potion. You heal 120 from 30 HP or less, which 120 will bring pretty much most things back to full health in a non-rule box game, so that's pretty good. Then we've got the Max Potion, which you lose the energy on it, but it heals all the damage. Can be good for buying time if you just put a big beefy Pokemon up front. Got some Supporter Recovery and Pal Pad. I'm not playing any VS Seeker or Verse Seeker, however they would call that card. And I could. Pretty much, if it's like a staple, it's in here. That's one I just kind of overlooked, and I like my item suite a lot, so I haven't really changed it. It's a Rescue Stretcher. You put 3 Pokemon in your deck, or just get one back to your hand. I like Night Stretcher too. I just have a lot of standard decks built, and they're not like 5 cents like almost every other card in this cube is. Not that once you get to the items and trainers, some of the cards are a little more. But my cube is so big, I do enjoy the fact that I don't have to sleeve it. And so Buddy Buddy Poffin and Night Stretcher are 2 cards that, while I like, I just opted to not include. But I would totally get why people would include them. So as I return 2 Pokemon with 90 HP or less from your discard to your hand, which is pretty handy in here because if you're trying to like line up a stage 2 and someone plays a boss and like spikes your early guy, just have a little bit more protection for your game plan. Got some ordinary rods. It's pretty self-explanatory, like a super rod, putting Pokemon energy back in the deck. Here's a super rod, putting Pokemon energy back in the deck. Camping gear, you look for anything, but it ends your turn. Just pretty good on the very first turn when you're not going to attack anyway or evolve anyway. And we got a Boost Shake, ends your turn, but you evolve early. Just nice kind of explosive play. We've got some coin flip cards, Capture Aroma, get an evolution or a basic. Crushing Hammer, Super Scoop Up, Pokemon Catcher. It's all pretty iconic. Also not running Counter Catcher in here, and I could. Just a card that didn't get selected because when you draft your deck, you don't necessarily know if you're going to be a deck that's going to be behind on prizes. Wouldn't blame anyone for playing it though because the card is good. Obviously, if you're behind, it helps you. And then if you're ahead, it's like, whatever, here's a card I'll just not need because I'm ahead. I got one thing for each energy type, basically, excluding normal. I think Electro Power is my favorite out of this series. I wish there was something cooler than Gutsy Pickaxe, but there just isn't. And then, I didn't want all of the colors to just have a patch effect. We've got a couple patch effects, and then a couple basic searchers. Return energy, search energy, extra damage, quasi acceleration, a little bit of everything. Now we're on to items and tools. Well, items or tools, stadiums, and special energy. We've gone over a little over half of the item pile at this point. So tools, I did singleton instead of multiple. And it's just kind of the smattering of tools from this era. And it's a little bit redundant while being, I could have just done doubles of ones from Sword and Shield. Here I have 2 different retreats from different era, 2 different retreat aids. And so I've got, and then a couple different attack increasers. I could have just done one multiple times. I think I have 20 tools here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20. Nice round number. And then I have 28 stadiums. The ones that are kind of type rewarding, or this one's poison rewarding, but those are obviously more beneficial because what you're doing, someone else is less likely to be doing because you were cutting into those cards. Sleep-based stadium. Another poison-based stadium that hates on stadiums. Because when you have one that works for both players, it's not necessarily a net positive for you. But yeah, just a bunch of different stadiums. Try to have at least one that rewards different types of each type. Didn't quite come out to exact balance, but you do what you can. I have a lot of different potential Pokemon that can hit Fossil. Usually because it's randomized, if I don't have something that evolves from Fossil, I don't take this card out or affect my shuffle patterns. I just let people know that, hey, there's no fossils in this pile. Same thing for dragons. You don't always randomize from a randomized perspective hit dragon. So granted, this works for more than just dragons, so it's still a decent card. So yeah, here's just a bunch of stadiums. In theory, this one could be good. I've thought of corner cases, but honestly, this one's never really done anything using attacks from lower evolutions. But pretty much all these other stadiums have been pretty good. And so I got 28 stadiums here, which roughly mass out to about 1.5 per person. So if you're doing an 8-person cube, you probably want at least 12. My math on that would be 14 here, but I would recommend at least 12. And the one thing about it being randomized is they're all cool and unique and iconic, and I don't have to cut any of them. I can run them all, but they don't always all show up every time either. You can't bank on them. Then we get to our special energy, which is the last thing we're going to go over today. We've got double colorless. I've basically got 8 of it because this one's punishes rule box, which we don't have. And I don't recommend building a cube with rule box. They're just way too swingy. And they kind of defeat the purpose of playing non-rule box Pokemon. They aren't built on the same level. And even if you did something like Scarlet and Violet Pokemon, and then you're playing with like EXs from like X and Y, it gets a little closer, but it's kind of dumb in other ways too, because then you are putting 2 prizers in. I could see an argument for playing twice as many double colorless energy as I play. This number has felt good, but it is a nice effect, and a lot of draft decks want to kind of build around taking advantage of this double energy kind of asset. and then I don't have that many of them going around. But not every deck drafts them, so I've had plenty of times where someone's picked up 3 of these in their draft deck because it's an effect they wanted, but the tables next to them didn't want. So maybe 8's a good number for 16 people's worth, but maybe you want more like 12. And then we've got some multicolor. It's hard to really load up on special energy, so this one's the best. We're playing a couple of the discard a card one too. And discard isn't always a drawback here, because sometimes it's like, I'll discard for Aurora Energy and then I'll play my Dark Patch or whatever. And you can kind of game it. We got some Capture Energy. It's like both special energy and a nest ball. That's pretty cool. We've got Gift Energy. It's a special energy, but then when your guy gets knocked out, you drop to 7. So that's pretty cool. And then we got a bunch of energy for the different types. I really like this cycle. I would recommend, even in a smaller cube, play one of each of these. This one cuts out weakness. This one provides free retreat. This one's basically a Rocky Helmet. You hit them back for 2 damage counters when you get attacked for damage. Reduce 20 damage. These effects can really compound, where you have this reduces 20 damage, and then you have a stadium that cuts 20 damage, and then you put a tool that cuts 20 or 30 damage. And if the Pokemon has a Pokemon power that cuts like 30 damage, I've seen some nearly indestructible Pokemon wreak havoc with that effect. It's pretty cool. The Speed Energy draws 2 cards, pretty cool. It's also cool that the lightning styled supporters usually grab lightning energy, so it's kind of nice to just chain stuff. This one prevents effects of attacks, which is pretty nice. And then we got extra 20 HP, which is pretty nice. And then we've got a full heal effect, which is kind of lackluster. Not as bad as the no weakness, but still cool. And then we've got the extra 20 damage, which is really cool for the normal types. So it's a cool cycle. And that is all the energy. So if you were going to build a cube, this supporter item stadium energy list is a really good starting block. And then obviously you don't even have to get all of that, because this is probably a bigger cube than you wanted to build. But if you wanted to build a cube this big or even bigger, you just kind of grab this item set, and you could double it to go even bigger. I've thought about doubling my counts of everything in here, because the way my key system works, I could theoretically scale all the way up to like a 64-person tournament where everyone's drafting unique stuff. And that's pretty cool. Then, I wanted to go over, I think I went over how the basics work. So we've got like 1 and 3, 1 stage 2, 3 stage 1s, and then it would be like 5 basics worth. If I already know I have 8 people coming, it gets pretty easy to just go, I need 40 basics worth. And then as I flip through them, okay, this one's 1 because it's a baby, but this one's 3. So now I'm at 4, 7, 10, 11, which it makes sense. And then there are some that are different, and I cut into the basics accordingly. So when I hit Gardevoir is a good example, because Gardevoir actually split evolves. So instead of being 4-3-3, Gardevoir is actually 4 Ralts, 4 Kirlia, and then it's 2 Galladay and 2 Gardevoir. And then Poliwhirl Poliwrath is the same way. So I actually have 12 in that line instead of 10. And every time I run into something like that, I cut into the basics a little bit. So a lot of times, if I have 8 players drafting at a table and I hit like this, or like some Eevees and like Slowbro, Slowking, other ones with split evolutions, I just use my basics to kind of fudge the numbers. And yeah, that's my oversized Pokemon cube. I didn't go into the Pokemon themselves, and I don't really think you have to. I think you can build your Pokemon with whichever era you want, and you can do your items and stadiums with whichever era you want too. And then, if you're picking like X, Y, or whatever, you have a lot less to choose from. You just have to be redundant about it. And so any questions on it, feel free to hit them up in the comments. I know it's a long video, and any comments on it, yeah, feel free to ask away, because I know this thing inside and out. And if you want a video looking at which ones I chose for which lines specifically, we can do that at some point. One other thing I wanted to go through. So in the stage ones, I have multiple. I know there's a bunch in here. So this is the key, and I just leave it shuffled up so I can randomize when. But I have 4 different EVs, and every time I hit an EV in my randomization process, when I go to collect my Pokemon from the key, EV I specifically leave all the way at the back. It's sorted by types, and Dragon's at the back, and then EV. I just get to the types here, and I just shuffle these up, and I deal 2. So if I hit 2 different EVs, I'm going to play with randomly 4 different evolutions. And yeah, gameplay with this is really great. At some point, I will probably try and actually get some gameplay like streams so people see what it actually feels like, because I would easily say this is the best way to play Pokemon. And like GLC is cool, but I think this is cooler because you actually you hit that redundancy. It's basically like build and battle perfected. And yeah, thanks for watching the video all the way to the end if you have. And feel free to ask questions, and I will answer them. And thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to subscribe. I know most people rather just watch me talk about Magic stuff, but Pokemon's cool too. It's honestly a lot of fun. I think Magic in a lot of ways is a better game, but not only is Pokemon a lot of fun, and this is a great way to play it, Pokemon costs like 10% of what Magic costs to play, and there's something really elegant to be said about that too. And then the other thing is, like me, I'm older. I have kids now. They aren't old enough for this yet. But this game is way easier to learn earlier than Magic is. And, if you have like a wife or something that like, Magic's a little bit much, Pokemon's a lot easier to grasp. And then just the IP. Like, Pokemon are way cooler than whatever the Gatewatch or the lore of Magic does not compete to the universe of Pokemon, at least in my opinion. Sometimes some things about Magic and the high fantasy are really cool, but then we're also going to have a Spider-Man set this year, so you know what Pokemon's never going to have to do? Really bad crossovers. They've got a really strong depth to their own property. And don't get me wrong, I really like Magic, and I'll probably keep playing it even when it's Spider-Man versus SpongeBob. But Pokemon's cool too. And the hype of it and the fact that there's chase cards and the non-chase cards are really playable in a fun little environment like this. And you can buy them at I probably averaged about 5 or 6 cents a card. And that just unheard of in Magic to build something that would have this level of fun to play at that price point. And so that's cool too. Thanks for watching, and until next time.